All right, I think I'm live. I'm just gonna do a quick follow-up um, from last week's rant about authority. So I called the bishop's office again after my little kerfuffle with the security guards and the three cops at St. Joseph's Oratory. I may as well come out and tell you the name of the place I was at now because it's been more or less resolved. I got a couple of calls from the office of the Archbishop in response to my concerns that I raised following the incident, and I was assured by both. It got escalated. First, I got some sort of secretary, and then it got escalated to someone up higher in the pecking order. But I was reassured by both representatives of the Archbishop that this should never have happened, that I'm right, they are wrong, and that there will be repercussions, meaning that they're going to take action, they're going to do a follow-up, they're going to make sure that this isn't happening in other places. And I think it is an exceptional situation because of the number of tourists that go to St. Joseph's Oratory. And I mentioned this in my last rant, but I think it's exceptional. I think there might be a couple of other places in Montreal that are very, very touristy that might also run into these sorts of problems because of the vax mandates and the passport and all that sort of thing. And trying to please Monsieur Legault, who's our premier here in Quebec, with all his directives and mandates and these sorts of things. So I was reassured, I was vindicated by the bishop's office, and I got a lot of sympathy and I got a lot of thanks. I mean, I'm not bragging, to be a whiner complaining and calling daddy to complain about my siblings. I'm not bragging about that, but I am very, very concerned. I shared my concerns, and the bishop's office appreciated that. Unless they're complete hypocrites just telling me what I want to hear to mollify me. I mean, that is a possibility. We live in a fallen world. Anything is possible. Excuse my hair being down. I just got out of the shower. I like to let it dry naturally. It's 7:43 here in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So I just woke up on a Sunday morning and I have my pancakes soon. But I just wanted to get this this video, this live stream out of the way, and then start my day. I'm going to go back. Hopefully that's my plan. My plan is to go back to St. Joseph's Oratory this evening and talk with a couple of the priests that I know there. Let them know the situation, that the bishop and those that I spoke with at the bishop's office are not happy with the way things played out, and that they were in complete agreement with me, ostensibly anyway. You never know what's in the heart of any human being, right? I know we're surrounded by hypocrites in the church and outside of the church. That's clear. I'm a hypocrite myself. But ostensibly they agreed with me that there's a hierarchy that needs to be respected, and that hierarchy is not a civil, worldly hierarchy. It's an ecclesiastical hierarchy, which is both human and divine. I had quite a long conversation, I would say, with both of the people that I spoke with at the office. I expressed all my concerns, which had to do primarily with authority and the dangers of falling into docile, submissive obedience to the wrong kinds of authority, the civil authorities. I don't want the church to be caving under the pressure of the world and submitting to anti-Catholic doctrines or directives or mandates. that are handed down by godless civil authorities, right? So my concerns were expressed, my concerns were shared, and I was promised a follow-up. Not a follow-up. I will not get a follow-up, but I was promised that they will take action. Am I really optimistic about what sort of action they'll take and how it will propagate down to the parish level and to the chapel level and to the oratory level? Not really. I don't think, I'm not expecting any headline news over this. I'm not expecting anything, really, honestly, I'm not expecting anything to change, right? But that's not what I was after. What I'm after is not really concrete change in the way the authority of the bishop trickles down. I think that's unrealistic. What I'm expecting and what I was hoping for in this was to have some clarification about where the bishop stands on the issue of authority. Basically, as I told the representatives of the bishop, I want to know if my bishop is Catholic or if he's anti-Catholic. That's important to me to know that, and I was reassured that the bishop is Catholic, and everything I know about him, he seems to be a fairly orthodox, and if you want to use the word conservative, that's how he's described often. You can look him up, Bishop Christian Lepine, Montreal, Quebec, Canada. So that's it. It's a little bit of vindication for me, and I will bring it up tonight when I'm at Mass. I'm going to go to confession and Mass tonight, God willing. I will bring it up. I'm curious to gauge the reaction of the priests at St. Joseph's Oratory, because they are very, very progressive there. I remember asking one time one of the priests there, have you ever met a priest here at the oratory who believes in special creation of the body of Adam and Eve, the bodies of Adam and Eve? And a priest, in other words, that doesn't buy into evolution. And he just laughed and said, no, I've never met any priest anywhere in the world. And then he said, well, correct me, I think I did meet one or two in the United States. So that's the kind of situation we're dealing with in this so-called modern age in the church. It's very hard to find a priest who doesn't buy into evolution. And if you buy into evolution, as it's being promoted by the world, by the godless scientists and philosophers of this world, if you buy into that as a priest, you will necessarily, I think, you will necessarily buy into the COVID propaganda, the COVID message, the COVID worldview. I think you'll buy into it. I think that they've got you at that point. I think that it is not a coincidence. I think it's an essential prerequisite to buy into COVID is to buy into Darwinism or neo-Darwinism or post-Darwinism or whatever the flavor of the week is in these evolutionist circles. I think it's one of the fundamental building blocks of worldliness is evolution, which denies that God created Adam out of the slime of the earth, right? Which is what we're obliged to believe as Catholics. I think it's a fundamental building block. It's like the the heresy of all heresies. It's the linchpin. It's the key to so many false doctrines, worldly doctrines. So I think I think we should really, as Catholics, all of us, we should really meditate on the genesis of our world, the fall of man, and the economy of salvation, and the four last things. I mean, this is, I think, if we have all of this in mind, using that traditional Catholic hermeneutic, where we always interpret everything in light of tradition, it will prevent us from falling into all kinds of worldly errors in the church. So, with respect to COVID, I mean, I've been thinking a little bit about the ever-evolving, ever-shifting narrative, the story of COVID, the story of the virus, the story of the disease that results from the virus, the story of the vaccine, so-called, that is proposed as the weapon of choice and really the only weapon of choice. This is the story, right? I think about the ever-evolving story in terms of how it's rolled out step by step. I think about how different age groups are emphasized at different times, and how we are given little hints about what's coming and what could not be, what might be, what seems like it could be, and what is, and what was inevitable, and and then we just repeat with this. We see things over the horizon and we say, no, that could not be, and then as it approaches we say, well, maybe it's inevitable, and then yeah, it's inevitable. So this movement toward the future in this COVID narrative is, you can see the pattern. You can if you step back and look and watch objectively, you can see the pattern of how we're prepared for a change, and then the change slowly is accepted, right? We have disbelief, and then the what ifs, and then the here it comes, and then here it is, and what do we do about it? And then there's the next thing. And I mean, I'm a little bit surprised at how slow people are in the mainstream. Like, I listen to a Greek radio station when I'm driving around. Part of my job is to drive around Montreal, going to job sites. And it's pretty much 99.9% pro-COVID propaganda mainstream radio. You're getting the state-sponsored propaganda. You're getting the constant bombardment of advertisements, explicit advertisements, state-sponsored propaganda advertisements. You're also getting constant bombardment of news, especially on the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. That's the worst. But on all the radio stations that I've heard in my pickup truck. And then you've got interviews, you've got stories, you've got little pieces put together, anecdotal stories or opinion pieces, heartfelt pleas for conformity to the narrative. You've got derisive pieces that are mocking and ridiculing any other point of view. But there's this one Greek radio station that I used to enjoy listening to. It's called Mike FM, and there's a woman on there called Maria, and she's always very entertaining, very emotional, and I used to enjoy listening to her. But she's been pushing the COVID agenda so hard. But the reason I'm talking about the radio and all this is because this Maria, this Greek woman, whom I love and respect, obviously, because she's a human being, she's slowly coming to an awakening. She's starting to introduce some talking points about the COVID narrative. She's starting to notice some contradictions, okay? And because she's an emotional Greek woman, you can feel the frustration and the confusion, and she's just perplexed. She's baffled and nonplussed. How could it be? And it doesn't make sense. And why now are the scientists telling us that it doesn't stop, that vaccines don't stop infection and they don't stop transmission? Well, I knew from day dot when they first talked about Pfizer in particular and their so-called preliminary studies, what they had promised was not prevention or reduction of infection and transmission, but a reduction of certain symptoms which are not important, right? Cold and flu-like symptoms. I have a remedy for the symptoms of cold and flu. I have a remedy for that. It's called rest, plenty of fluid, and common sense. I don't need gene therapy to reduce the cold and flu symptoms. I don't need that, and no one needs that. But this woman, Maria, on this Greek radio station here in Montreal, God bless her, she is only finding out now that the vaccines don't do what the media, including herself, the media have been telling us, right? The media has been exaggerating, I guess you could say, or lying about the safety and efficacy of these so-called vaccines. And she's just now, a year later, realizing that she's been duped. I knew from the beginning because I went to the source and I looked at what is Pfizer promising us. Not much. Not much. I don't know about the others, but I would imagine it's the same thing. Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. I would imagine it was the same thing. They didn't promise much. Right? And then, of course, with the issue of children being vaccinated, most mothers, most women, most humans, period, are a little bit concerned about children, right? Just naturally, intuitively, we want to guard and protect the most vulnerable, and that includes not only the aged, who have been completely decimated, murdered, I would say murdered. I don't think that's an exaggeration. The elderly, the most vulnerable on that end of the spectrum, have been murdered, I would say, very confidently. I think people of all ages have been murdered by this mismanagement of this so-called pandemic. I know it's controversial to say that, but I mean, I've been saying that from the very beginning, and the mainstream scientists are starting slowly to admit some of the dangers of these gene therapies. Slowly, ever so slowly. You'll see a little study here and there. It's not widely published, but you'll see the mainstream reporting on it discreetly. And it's just a very slow boil. And someone somewhere has said that it's about 30% completely brainwashed, 40% willing to go either way, but for the time being, just going with the flock, and 30%, the remaining 30% who are aware, as I believe I am, aware that it's a joke, it's a bad joke, it's a sick joke, it's a demonic lie and a manipulation. This whole management, this whole mismanagement of whatever this is, I think it's a bioweapon or a series of bioweapons, I don't know. If you look at the history of biological warfare, the recent history of biological weapons that are being developed and that have been developed, you can't help but see, wow, it aligns very nicely with everything that we're learning about this so-called pandemic, right? Like there's so many pieces that fit. You know, they sponsored research, and if you want to call it research into antidotes, you want to call it research into vaccines against potential biological weapons, or if you want to call it what it really is, research of biological weapons, because they use the antidote as an excuse for doing research into biological warfare. And I mean, I do understand this is a nightmare situation where if one side is developing biological weapons, then the other side might feel impelled to compete, right? You might feel that if you don't do something, if you don't play ball, if you don't get involved in the game, you're going to be decimated. You're not going to be prepared, right? So I was listening to something, I don't know what it was I was listening to recently, but they were saying we have to stop the madness of biological warfare because it's out of control, it's too dangerous, it's too hard to manage, and you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Basically, that's the gist of this man's plea for sanity. I think it's naive. I think we live in a fallen world. I think that warfare has been here since the fall. It's been getting more sophisticated. The science, engineering, the technologies have become more and more sophisticated. If you look at drone warfare compared to, you know, swords and spears, or cavalry on horsebacks and horseback elephants, whatever. If you read the Old Testament, you'll get an idea of what warfare used to be, right? A couple thousand years ago, a few thousand years ago. So we've developed some pretty sophisticated weapons, some sophisticated technologies for the whole infrastructure of war, a large part of that being construction, because siege warfare was always a very important component of war. How to starve your enemy and then weaken the enemy, building ramparts and walls and fortifications, and building against fortifications and these sorts of things. So the technology with construction has always been a very, very important element of war. That's been under development. Travel or transportation is another element. We've got not only tanks and ships and aircraft, we also have things like satellites and lasers and drones and artificial intelligence and facial recognition software and all these sorts of things that we can bring to bear on finding and killing the so-called enemy, right? But putting the genie back in the bottle, I think it's very naive, because look at the pattern. Look at the pattern of history. Look at how war has evolved. What is the situation really, if we look at it objectively? Look objectively at the history of war, and look at the history of peace. Look at the history of war and peace on planet Earth. From the fall to today, what do you see? Are things getting better? It's an interesting question. I mean, I have lived a life, 51 years old. I lived a life of complacent tranquility and peace, and I haven't been to war. I haven't seen war here in Canada. I've never seen anyone killed in war firsthand. I've seen a lot of it on TV, obviously. And it seems that since the first two world wars, in the period between the Second World War and COVID, it seems that there were only small and manageable wars here and there. Not here, but there. I mean, this is the main point, right? Here in the Western world, we think of war as happening where the oil is, or where whatever the natural resources are that people are fighting over. If they start coming for water, I think Canada is going to see some violence, because we've got a lot of water. But usually it's been oil and gold and these sorts of things. But my point is that it's, in my lifetime, it's been relatively peaceful, or seemingly so. And in the background, you've just got this idea that there's war over here, there's war in the Middle East, there are tensions here and there. It's never too close to home for those of us who live in Canada, and I would say even in the US, even though the US is so heavily and obviously involved in so many conflicts around the world, right? But I grew up, I remember as a child laying awake at night worrying about nuclear war. I remember that clearly. Worrying as a child. I was, the age of reason, 6, 7, 8, whatever. I remember praying to God, because I lost my faith at age 14. I remember praying to God that we would be protected, we would be safe, that we would not be, that myself, my siblings, my parents, my family in particular, would not be killed by a nuclear blast. I mean, I would have images in my head of the mushroom cloud, because we were seeing that during the Cold War. We were seeing that on the television, and I was raised on the television. So it infiltrated my psyche, and it was a real fear, Then that subsided, largely thanks to Saint John Paul II, his interventions. Things cooled off, and then for the most part, you hear about the Gulf War and these sorts of things are not really a real threat to us up here in Canada. So I lived most of my adult life without any sort of war on my radar, really. And it's only with COVID that we start to see, what's happening What's happening now? This is different. This is different from the, USSR versus USA arms race, nuclear arms race, mutually assured destruction, and all these sorts of things. Now, we've been hearing about biological warfare for years. I've been hearing about it my whole adult life, but it's only in very early 2020 that it sort of got on my radar. And as soon as it did, as soon as the government started telling me about the precautions that I need to take as a Canadian citizen, I knew right away something's fishy here. Something is not right. This is not a naturally occurring virus, right? What was the clue? Well, the clue is when you've got governments speaking out in an authoritative way with an air of familiarity and an air of how should I say, I knew instantly that they knew way more than they were telling us, right? It's like, I don't know if when you're a child, when your parents talk in hushed tones and then they give you a little directive or a little mollifying statement or a little controlling statement to contain the situation, okay? So the adults have their adult talk and it's hush hush. And then there's a little containment of, oh, well, let's not let the children know what's really happening. It's a very common technique in parenting, right? It's also painfully obvious to the children that something's up, right? It's kind of like in the movies when they have the parents who are getting divorced and it's been a long time coming, right? And there's adultery involved and there's all kinds of shady stuff going on in the adult world. And then there are signs and hints that all is not well, but it's contained as much as possible by the parents to protect the children, but the children have an intuition and they're not stupid. And then there are these little talks that are had with the children in order to contain the fear, contain the emotion, and to prevent any sort of contamination by this dark and evil adult world onto the kids, the innocent kids. But the kids aren't stupid, they know. So it's the same thing with the government and the governed, right? There's a parent-child relationship which is unnatural and inappropriate, but it is there because a lot of adults want to be parented by the government because they don't have God, right? So they replaced God, our Father, with government, our Father, or our mothering God with a mothering government. Okay, so there's a demand, and there's also a desire on the part of worldly, selfish, godless rulers to be that parent, right? And it's mixed in with a whole bunch of genuinely human elements, which Freud would characterize as a complex. There's like cognitive dissonance because they are human, but they're godless. So they're kind of sort of human. They have the empathy, but not really. And they want what's best for their children, but not really. It's psychologically broken, right? The godless leaders who are ruling, the politicians who are human, but they're broken, they're fallen, and they're out of touch with their creator. So it's a broken home situation. That's what we have here. And the only solution, the solution is not the naive solution that I heard the other day, where the governments have to just disavow themselves of biological warfare. No, the solution, that's unrealistic. The solution is to ask yourself, each and every human on the planet, ask yourself, who am I? How did I get here? What's going on? What is life? What is death? What caused the contingent things to be? And the answer, the inevitable answer for those who are able to think clearly, the inevitable answer that's available to everyone who can think, is that there is a God, there is one God, that He's infinite in every perfection, and that we must strive sincerely to know Him, to love Him, and to serve Him in this world so that we can be happy with Him forever in the next world. And if everyone did that, we would not have, I guarantee you, we would not have any war anymore. That is the solution, but it's not going to happen. Jesus Christ promised us it's not going to happen. You will have the weeds among the wheat. You will have them. And you will have the poor. You will always have the poor, and you will always have the weeds. And there's a connection between the poor and the weeds. The weeds make the poor. Without the weeds, there will be no poor, because it's the weeds that necessitate injustice. It's the weeds that want to have a slave class. And so Jesus Christ promised us we will always have the weeds, we will always have the poor, and therefore we will always have war. So what can we do? Well, what we can do is, those of us who are blessed, I guess you could say, with the grace of conversion, can say yes to the grace of conversion. Like, I was an atheist and now I'm a believer, because all the graces that I was given at a certain moment in time in 2009, for whatever mysterious reason, at that point in time, I was ready. I was prepared to say yes to the graces. And I was able to say yes to God, and I was converted, right? I allowed myself at that time to be converted, but not beforehand. From the age of 14 to 39, I did not allow myself to say yes to all the graces I was given. It's very mysterious. It's very sobering and frightening to think about the power we have with our free will to say no to God and to say no to God's grace. But if each and every one of us can strive sincerely to, and it is a struggle even now, right, for me. So I'm letting you know it's not easy. It requires a concerted effort. You have to strive to move forward. If you don't move forward, you're moving backwards, right? There's no standing still in your walk with God. You're moving forward because you will to move forward, or you're moving backward. There's no standing still. Standing still is when your will to move forward is lackluster and you're only moving forward a little bit. That's standing still. That's stagnating. When your will to move forward in your walk with God is slow, as mine is now, it's slow. My walk with God is going through a very rough patch this past 2 years, largely because of COVID, largely because of that, but other factors as well. My walk with God has slowed down, and so I'm stagnating. I'm not advancing. But if I were to stop, if I were to abandon this weak will that I have to move forward with God, I would be moving backward. So we need to understand, as individuals who are struggling in this life, we need to understand that it's a decision. It's a decision that we make as individuals, come what may, and no matter the circumstances. You're rich, poor, black, white, young, old, healthy, unhealthy, whatever it is. Okay? Smart, dumb, it doesn't matter. It's a choice. It's a choice you make, and you have to make that choice, and you need to make that choice constantly. It's not a one-time thing. You don't flick a switch and then just start accelerating toward heaven. It's not like that. You need to strive, and you need to work, and there are challenges. And you're largely on your own. You will be judged individually, and you are walking as an individual. Now you can get support, and you should encourage yourself by walking with those who are like-minded, right? Surround yourself with good people. If you have good and holy people around you, they will help you. Their energy, their vibe, their encouragement, their example, their words of wisdom, their strength, their power, their vision will energize you, and it will give you direction, and it will focus you, and it will help you to prioritize your will, because it's all about you and your will. You're on an individual walk, and your judgment, your private judgment, your particular judgment is a one-on-one affair. You can't blame Hitler, you can't blame Fauci, you can't blame Biden, you can't blame anyone. You can't even blame your mother or your brother. You can't blame your spouse. You can't blame anyone. You can't blame your child. You can't blame anyone. You certainly can't blame God Almighty. Okay, so it's an individual walk with God, and it's a walk that requires determination, perseverance. We need to pray for the faith, to have faith. We need to have perseverance in faith, and we need the love of God. We need divine love. We need the grace to love God more and more and more. My love of God has been waning because I've been neglecting my obligations as a Catholic. I haven't been as on fire. I haven't been availing myself, particularly in the early part of the pandemic. I wasn't availing myself of prayer and the sacraments as I used to. Okay, and there's a delayed response to that, right? Like when it became difficult to go to Mass, I stopped going to Mass. Okay. At first it was perhaps legitimate. There were like churches closed, there was chaos. It was impossible to go to Mass on Sunday. But I used to be going to Mass daily, and then suddenly I wasn't going to Mass at all. I think I went a few months without going to Mass at all, early in the pandemic. So that was, the effects of that were not instantaneous. It's now I'm feeling the lethargy, the spiritual lethargy from not availing myself of prayer and the sacraments, because my prayer life suffered too. So this is how the world works against us, against our precious souls, and against our precious faith. It's insidious, it's subtle, and it's I never dreamed that the government would interfere with my church, that the government would make it difficult and at times impossible to go to church, to simply go to church. And when it became impossible and difficult and unpredictable and different obstacles put in my way, there's a despair that I succumbed to. I should not have succumbed to the despair, but I succumbed to this despair, and I just said, I'll just stay home, and I'll just, I mean, we were on lockdown for, I don't know how long, here in Montreal, Quebec. I mean, curfew, lockdown. So it's not like I don't have any excuse, but I mean, the impact of that, the impact of the obstacles has a lasting effect, even today. And there's a sort of spiritual lethargy, spiritual laziness that I was already prone to, but it's kind of like a rut, like a funk that you get into, and I can't blame the world, right? But it's revealing, it's humbling, it's revealing to me how weak I am, right? So this has been a sad and depressing past couple of years. But if I can be truly humbled, if I can be truly humbled and see how weak I am, how easily I can fall into lethargy spiritually. I've always known my prayer life is not very powerful or pure. I've always known that. I've talked about it on my podcast. I've talked about it. There's an inner struggle every time I do set prayers. I have fixed prayers that I have to do by obligation. I struggle. I've always struggled. But by the grace of God, I've continued to say my daily prayers. I don't say them well. I may have moments where I'm focused and I'm praying well, but it's not a high quality prayer session. I do my morning prayers, I do my evening prayers, but it's usually just in turmoil and under tension and anxiety and more or less just to get it over with. Yeah, okay, I've accomplished it, I've done it, okay. Now, like I said, there are moments where my prayer life is calm, it is full of peace, and I am connecting and I am focused and I'm recollected. But it needs to be nourished. My prayer life needs to be nourished by the sacraments. You know, for the past, I don't know, year or so, I've been back at the weekly Mass, at least, the Sunday Mass. So that's a start. My goal is to get back to daily Mass. My goal is to have a prayer life that's not as impoverished as it's been. And so you can hear in my complaints here that I'm struggling against my own weakness and that it's frustrating. And I think that this is what each of us needs to do as individuals, right? If you're a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian of any denomination, I think you need to strive to keep moving your faith forward, keep improving against all that's dragging you down. Like I've been dragged down, and I allow myself to be dragged down. And for those of us who are not monotheists, I think we need to strive in our own way for the truth, because it's my love of truth that brought me to God, brought me to monotheism, and brought me to the Catholic Church. And we all have the potential to find God and to, once we've found God, to find true religion. We all have that potential. Now, I shouldn't say we all have that potential, because there are people who are going to end up in hell. Many saints say that the majority of people end up in hell. And that is a very sobering thought. So I can't say that we're all destined for God, for monotheism, for Catholicism. We can't all be destined for that, because some of us are destined for hell. sadly. But even those who end up in hell have free will. They have a choice to make. It just so happens that some do inevitably choose to say no. From God's point of view, yeah, it's inevitable. So from God's point of view, if we try to look from God's point of view, it may seem that they were predestined for hell, but that's not the case. They were not predestined for hell. God did not cause their perseverance in sin. God is aware of it, but that doesn't mean he caused it. He does not cause anyone to go to hell. But those of us who will not end up in hell will end up in heaven. So those of us who will not end up in hell are members of Christ. This is what I learned. I mean, it was phrased so beautifully in this book, Ott's Fundamentals. Very, very powerful little paragraph. I wish I could find it for you right now and read it to you, but if you go and listen to my readings, you'll stumble upon it. There are 4 kinds of people. 3 of them are destined for heaven and 1 destined for hell. Those who are destined for hell obviously do not belong to the church, but the other 3 types do belong to the church. They are full members, okay? People who acknowledge themselves as Catholic and who meet the minimum requirements of being Catholic and who are in the state of grace. I'm going to go to confession tonight, and so I will be, if I'm not now, I will be, I hope to be tonight in the state of grace. So I will be in that first category, full membership. The second category of those destined for heaven and those who are part of the church are those who have the faith but are not in the state of grace. So last week, I think it was last week or the week before, I was not in the state of grace. It was a horrible, horrible, horrible feeling. I could not wait to get to confession, and I got to confession and I confessed my sins and I was in the state of grace. But before confession, I was in that second category. I had the faith. I still had the faith, but I was not in the state of grace. I had the faith, but I was not in the state of grace. That's the second category of those who belong to the church. The third and most exciting category is those who do not have the faith and therefore cannot be in the state of grace. Those who do not even have the faith, but they're part of the church. Why? Because they're not destined for hell. They will end up in heaven, and therefore they have necessarily the potential to be full members of the church. They have the potential to get the faith and then to get in the state of grace. So this is what I love about Christ and his church, and this is what I love about the Second Vatican Council. All the controversy among the rad-trads and the sedevacantists about the church subsists in the Holy Roman Catholic Church. Why that word subsists? Why the word subsists? Why don't you just say the church is the Catholic Church? Why don't you just say that? This is what the rad-trads and the sedevacantists argue against Vatican II. Why are they watering it down? Why is Vatican II watering it down? Why not just say the church is the Catholic Church? Well, the reason, if you study the document in question, the reason, and I go over this in some of my meta episodes, the reason is precisely that threefold membership. Those who are in the state of grace, full members. Those who have the faith but are not in the state of grace. And those who have the potential to climb that ladder, to get the faith and get in the state of grace. And everything in this world, everything is ordered to that end, to bring people from the potential to the faith, and from the faith to the state of grace. Why? So that they can know God, to love God, and to serve God in this world, so that they can be happy with God forever in the next world. There are only two final destinations, heaven and hell. So everything is ordered to that progression toward the faith and the fullness of the faith and the fullness of membership in the church. So to say that there are non-Catholics in heaven is absurd. It's ridiculous. We know that truth does not contradict truth. We can't have two people in heaven who disagree about truth, about ultimate reality, about God, about salvation history, about the economy of salvation. If you think that there's going to be a devout Baptist up in heaven who still hates the papacy and different aspects of the Catholic Church, you're deluded. You don't know what heaven is. You don't know what the truth is. You don't know what God is. Right? It's not controversial. It's not controversial to say that everyone in heaven is Catholic, if the Catholic Church is the one true church that was built by the God-man, Jesus Christ, and if that presumes, obviously, that Christ is who he claims to be. If Christ is not who he claims to be, then obviously Christianity is just another false religion. It's the worst one, the most blasphemous, the most sacrilegious of all religions. I couldn't think of a worse one. I think that's a little bit of a hint and a clue as to its veracity, because if we were to compare and contrast all of the religions claiming to be the one true religion, and if we were to assume for the sake of argument that they're not, and what would that mean? Some of the New Age religions are equally impactful if they're true or if they're not true. Right? Because it's a hodgepodge of contradiction to begin with, so it's just like there's no real impact either way. It's true, it's not true, meh, right? But if Christianity is false, then we've got nothing but a piece of bread and a glass of wine with a drop of water in it, being literally worshipped as God. Okay? So you couldn't get more blasphemous and sacrilegious than that. The stakes are very, 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 very high for a Catholic. The stakes are high. How do you get the boldness, if not by the grace of God, the boldness to say this piece of what looks like a piece of bread, and what was a piece of bread a moment ago, before the consecration, is now truly, really, and actually the body, blood, soul, and divinity of the God-man, Jesus Christ? What audacity. Who can come up with this? Who would have the audacity to claim that without the grace, the supernatural grace of God? Who can even imagine that? So I'm going to wrap things up here. Obviously, I've just been giving a meandering rant about war and peace and faith and the struggles of the faith, and how we have a responsibility as individuals to strive for peace by striving for faith. And we strive for faith by striving for the truth. And it's an individual project. You need to look inside and ask yourself some tough questions. Who am I? What am I? Where do I come from? Where am I going? That's the key to peace. That's the key to happiness. And some of us will not Make it. Look around you, okay? Look at the nice, pleasant people around you and imagine that some of them, maybe most of them, will end up burning in hell for all eternity. Think about that. And what can you do to have an impact on them so they wake up? Waking up to the four last things is key. Having a genuine dread and fear of offending God is key. And if you need the fear of hell to get you there, that's okay. It's an imperfect way, but it is a good start. And the fear of hell motivates me because my love of God is weak these days. It's very weak. So it's the fear of God that's going to help me to get through the rough patch and to foster and nurture, by God's grace, the love of God. I'm begging God for divine love and for perseverance and faith. If you want to read the saints, I recommend St. Alphonsus Liguori. That's what I'm currently reading. I'm taking a little break now to read RFK Jr.'s book about Fauci, which is disgusting. If it's true, and I take everything with a grain of salt, if it's true, it is absolutely disgusting. Horrifying. But like I said, I take it with a grain of salt. But I'm taking a little break from Liguori, but I'll get back to Liguori. If you want to read Preparation for Death, or if you want to read the Meditations of St. Anselm, these will help to inspire a fear of God, a wholesome fear of God, a fear of hell, with view to a fear of offending God. And the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening to my little rant. I've been vindicated by the Archdiocese of Montreal. They will look into it. They will take action to correct the situation because it should not have arisen. I should not have been turned away. They sympathized with me and they apologized and they thanked me for bringing it to their attention, and they will take action. So that's the update. I have been vindicated. The question of authority. My faith has been restored a little bit in the hierarchy of the church because it seems that those at the office of the Archbishop are on my side in this question of authority. So that's it. Take care. Have yourselves a good Saturday, and we'll talk soon. Maybe I'll do some more Ludwig Ott later today. We'll see how it goes. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for listening. God bless. Bye.